Hello everyone, and welcome to my YNR Official 24 channel. Victor NEWMAN, the titan of Genoa City, whose life had long been defined by power, dominance, and the iron grip he maintained over both his family and his sprawling business empire, yet now he faced a threat unlike any he had encountered in decades of corporate warfare, a threat that carried with it the very real possibility of prison time, and the source of this unprecedented pressure was none other than Jack Abbott, whose resentment toward Victor had simmered beneath the surface for years. Ever since the bitter legal battles, the corporate takeovers, and the tangled personal betrayals that had defined the complex, often toxic, relationship between the Abbotts and the NEWMANs, and now Jack had formed a strategic and dangerous alliance with Phyllis and Cane Ashby, two individuals whose motivations were complicated and deeply personal, Phyllis driven by a blend of lingering resentment, ambition, and perhaps a touch of revenge, always playing her own game and never truly trusting anyone, not even those closest to her, while Cane, caught between loyalty, love, and pragmatism, had decided that siding with Jack and Phyllis was the safest route to protect his own interests and perhaps even to exact some measure of justice, or at least perceived justice, against Victor, whose business practices, while always shrouded in legality, had skirted the edges of ethical behavior so many times that a single misstep in this high-stakes game could now land him behind bars. A scenario that seemed almost unthinkable to those who had long believed Victor to be untouchable, a man who had survived everything from corporate takeovers to personal betrayals, from multiple attempts on his reputation to near-death experiences, yet here he was, staring down the cold, unforgiving reality of the law, and the gnawing tension in the air was palpable, as if the very walls of NEWMAN Enterprises could sense the impending storm, the whispers in the hallways carrying fragments of rumors, speculation, and outright fear. Because everyone knew that Jack Abbott was a formidable adversary, a man with a razor-sharp legal mind, an unyielding sense of purpose, and an intimate understanding of Victor's weaknesses, both personal and professional, and with Phyllis providing insider knowledge, connections, and a flair for manipulation that could unsettle even the most grounded of minds, and Cane Ashby acting as the quiet, calculating force who could implement strategic maneuvers behind the scenes, they had formed a triumvirate of threat, poised to bring down the very man who had built an empire, a man whose name alone carried weight across boardrooms and dinner tables alike, whose presence commanded respect, fear, and, at times, reluctant admiration. And now, with legal documents being drawn up, subpoenas being prepared, and investigators circling ever closer, Victor could feel the walls closing in, each tick of the clock echoing in his mind like the drumbeat of impending doom, and his usual confidence, the unshakable certainty that he could manipulate, intimidate, and outwit anyone who dared to challenge him, was beginning to falter, replaced by a creeping sense of vulnerability, a rare emotion for a man who had spent his life controlling the uncontrollable, bending situations, people, and outcomes to his will. Yet Jack, Phyllis, and Cane had found a convergence of circumstances, a perfect storm that left Victor in a precarious position, where his decades of experience, his cunning, and his resources might not be enough to protect him, and in his private moments, in the silence of his office where the weight of the empire seemed to press down upon him, he contemplated the personal consequences beyond the legal ramifications, the potential humiliation, the shattering of family trust, the impact on those who depended on him, and the bitter realization that even a man of his stature was not immune to accountability, no matter how well-concealed or cleverly orchestrated. And as he sat in his leather chair, staring at the framed photographs of his children, his grandchildren, and the legacy he had fought so fiercely to create, he realized that the coming days would demand every ounce of strategy, every shred of resilience, and perhaps even a willingness to confront truths he had long avoided, truths about his own actions, the way he had wielded power, and the enemies he had made along the way, because in the high-stakes world of Genoa City, where love, betrayal, ambition, and greed intertwined in a dizzying dance, no one was untouchable, and the line between predator and prey was thin, shifting, and perilously close, and as Jack mobilized his legal team, leveraging evidence, testimonies, and every procedural advantage available, and Phyllis orchestrated manipulations with her usual cunning, setting traps, nudging allies into position, and sowing just enough doubt to create panic, and Cane executed tactical maneuvers that could undermine Victor's financial standing while keeping their hands clean. The pressure on Victor mounted to an almost unbearable degree, the kind of pressure that can erode even the strongest of wills, and yet, true to his nature, Victor refused to crumble entirely, already plotting counter-moves, assessing vulnerabilities, recalling past victories, analyzing every detail of Jack's approach, every nuance of Phyllis's schemes, every subtle action Cane might take, because giving up was not an option, never had been, and the fight to retain control of his empire, his freedom, and his legacy had become a battle not just for survival, but for the very definition of who Victor NEWMAN was, a battle that would expose alliances, reveal secrets, ignite passions, and perhaps forever alter the balance of power in Genoa City as the drama unfolded in boardrooms, courtrooms, and private encounters, where whispered conversations, veiled threats, and carefully planted information could tip the scales, and where every gesture, expression, and strategic move carried immense weight. And the stakes had never been higher, for if Victor faltered, even for a moment, the consequences could be catastrophic, not just in legal terms, but emotionally, socially, and financially, and the ripple effects would touch every corner of his life, from the loyalty of his children, to the trust of his allies, to the ambitions of his rivals, all converging into a maelstrom of tension, intrigue, and relentless suspense, so that by the time the first legal hearings began, the city of Genoa itself seemed to hold its breath, aware that a showdown of epic proportions was underway. One that would test not only Victor's intelligence, tenacity, and resilience, but also the cunning, ambition, and resolve of those aligned against him, a showdown where no move could be taken lightly, no words spoken carelessly, and no alliance assumed permanent, because in this world of wealth, power, and secrets, the only constant was change, the only certainty was risk, and the only path to survival was to anticipate, adapt, and, if necessary, fight with every tool at one's disposal. And as Victor contemplated the potential outcomes, exoneration, compromise, or incarceration, he knew that the next days would define not only the future of NEWMAN Enterprises, but also the legacy of Victor NEWMAN himself, for better or worse, as the intricate web of intrigue spun tighter, the tension escalated, and the drama of the Abbott-Summers-Ashby alliance against him reached a fever pitch, leaving every viewer, every participant, and every ally on edge, all while Victor, ever the strategist, calculated his next steps with the cold, unflinching precision that had always set him apart, even as the shadow of potential imprisonment loomed larger with each passing hour, creating a story of suspense, betrayal, and resilience that could only exist in the high-stakes, emotionally charged world of Genoa City, where OMG moments were not only inevitable, but practically guaranteed, and the question remained, could Victor NEWMAN, the man who had faced countless adversaries, survived scandals, and weathered personal and professional storms, navigate this perfect storm of legal pressure, personal betrayal, and ruthless strategy to emerge victorious once again? Or was this the moment when even a titan could finally be brought low, forever altering the landscape of power in the young and the restless, leaving fans gasping, hearts racing, and eyes glued to every twist, turn, and OMG revelation that was certain to follow in the next explosive episodes? Victor's mind raced as he considered every possible scenario, knowing that even the smallest misstep could be catastrophic, and the gravity of his situation was unlike anything he had faced before. For years of experience, influence, and cunning were being put to the ultimate test, challenged not just by legal threats but by a coalition of individuals who had intimate knowledge of his strategies, his weaknesses, and his history. And as he paced the length of his lavish office, the rich leather of the chairs, the polished mahogany of the desk, and the imposing portraits of past generations of NEWMANs seemed to bear silent witness to the storm about to engulf him, the very air thick with anticipation, dread, and the weight of consequence. For Victor was not only fighting for freedom but for reputation, legacy, and the affirmation that he could still outmaneuver those who believed they had finally cornered him. And yet, even as he plotted counter-strategies, he could not ignore the human dimension of the battle, the personal toll that could fracture familial bonds, undermine alliances, and test the loyalty of those who had long stood beside him, from his children to long-time confidants, each of whom would be forced to navigate the treacherous waters of Jack, Phyllis, and Cane's intricate scheming, and Victor knew that misreading even one glance, one gesture, or one whispered conversation could spell disaster. As he had learned over decades that in Genoa City, appearances were never innocent, and smiles often concealed daggers sharper than the ones wielded openly. Jack Abbott, for his part, had meticulously prepared for this confrontation, and his approach was as methodical as it was personal. He had studied Victor's past moves, identified patterns in his business decisions, and dug into old alliances, disputes, and vulnerabilities, understanding that victory over a man like Victor required more than legal knowledge. It required psychological warfare, anticipation of responses, and the ability to manipulate situations in ways that left Victor reactive rather than proactive, and Jack's alliance with Phyllis and Cane was a masterstroke in this regard, for each brought complementary skills to the table. Phyllis's subtle manipulations, charm, and ability to extract information, and Cane's calm, calculating execution of strategic plans, ensured that Victor would face pressure from multiple fronts, unable to focus entirely on any one attack without leaving himself exposed elsewhere, and Jack reveled privately in the thought that after years of rivalry, he could finally deliver a blow that would not just hurt Victor temporarily, but could permanently shift the balance of power in Genoa City, a satisfaction that was as intoxicating as it was motivating, and he prepared meticulously, rehearsing arguments, examining potential loopholes, and coordinating with both Phyllis and Cane to ensure that every move, every disclosure, and every legal maneuver would be timed perfectly, maximizing pressure and minimizing Victor's ability to respond effectively, and the collaboration between them, though uneasy at times due to conflicting motivations, had solidified around the shared goal of finally bringing Victor to a position of vulnerability where the law, the court of public opinion, and Victor's own conscience could converge to threaten everything he had built. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers worked her usual magic, the kind that combined insight into human behavior with ruthless practicality, always calculating how to turn conversations, meetings, and even casual encounters to her advantage, and she knew that the key to this plan's success would be exploiting the small fractures in Victor's relationships, between him and his children, between him and trusted allies, even between him and his own sense of morality. For Victor's brilliance was matched by an ego and a stubbornness that could be leveraged against him if handled correctly, and she set about planting seeds of doubt, subtly questioning the loyalty of Victor's supporters, feeding information that would create internal tension, and ensuring that Victor remained off balance, questioning whom he could trust while under extreme pressure from Jack's legal onslaught, and Phyllis took careful care to present herself at critical moments as an ally when needed, only to reveal hints of opposition, a strategy that ensured maximum anxiety and distraction for Victor, knowing that uncertainty was often a far more effective weapon than brute force or direct attack. Cane Ashby, by contrast, approached the plan with a cold, tactical logic, the kind that made him a dangerous component in this alliance, for he had a unique ability to move undetected, implement measures behind the scenes, and create domino effects without drawing attention to himself. And his role was essential because while Jack and Phyllis applied pressure frontally, Cane worked in the shadows, undermining Victor's plans, gathering evidence, and occasionally intercepting communications, ensuring that the very foundation of Victor's control over NEWMAN Enterprises could be questioned or destabilized at critical junctures. And Cane's involvement was complicated by personal feelings, as his connections to Victor's family and past loyalties tugged at him, but he understood that commitment to the alliance, at least outwardly, was necessary for success, and he steeled himself against the emotional weight of the task, focusing instead on measurable outcomes, precise maneuvers, and Contingency planning, knowing that the smallest miscalculation could unravel the entire strategy. Victor, sensing the multi-pronged approach against him, intensified his own preparations, calling in legal experts, consulting with long-trusted advisors, and reviewing every past transaction, statement, and precedent that could be leveraged against him, his mind racing through potential counterarguments, preemptive strikes, and methods to fracture the alliance before it could fully execute its plan. Yet he could not deny a creeping anxiety, rare for a man of his experience, as he contemplated the implications not only for his freedom but for the legacy he had fought his entire life to secure, the empire he had built from sheer determination, business acumen, and an unrelenting drive to succeed against all odds. And now all of that seemed suddenly fragile, teetering on the edge of legal jeopardy, personal betrayal, and public scrutiny. And the realization that even the most carefully cultivated reputation could be challenged, damaged, or destroyed in the blink of an eye added a psychological layer of tension that made every decision heavier, every action more critical, and every moment more fraught with potential consequence. Adding to the tension, the city itself seemed to respond to the brewing storm, for in Genoa City, whispers carried weight, and news traveled fast, especially when it involved the Newmans and Abbots, and soon, rumors of Victor's legal troubles began circulating among the social elite, the business community, and even casual acquaintances, adding pressure not only from the alliance itself, but from public perception. An arena where appearances mattered as much as reality, if not more, and Victor felt the strain as he navigated the dual challenge of defending his actions while maintaining the aura of untouchability that had served him so well throughout his life, understanding that any sign of weakness could be exploited not only by Jack, Phyllis, and Cane but by other opportunistic rivals lurking in the shadows, ready to capitalize on even the smallest indication that Victor NEWMAN might be vulnerable. And as the tension escalated, every meeting, phone call, and exchange became a battleground, where words were weapons, expressions were scrutinized, and every interaction could be a trap or a test, requiring Victor to maintain constant vigilance while simultaneously executing his own counter-strategies with precision. Victor's family, too, was swept into the vortex of pressure, for the children and grandchildren of NEWMAN Enterprises, accustomed to a life of influence and expectation, now found themselves drawn into the unfolding drama, each facing the complex emotional challenge of supporting a father and grandfather who, though formidable, was now confronting a real threat to his freedom, and their responses varied, from fierce loyalty to cautious skepticism, reflecting the intricate web of emotions that had long characterized the NEWMAN family dynamic, and the potential for fractures within the family added yet another dimension to Victor's concerns, for in moments of crisis, internal division could be just as dangerous as external attack, and Victor knew that managing not only his adversaries, but also his own kin would require as much skill, persuasion, and psychological insight as navigating the legal maelstrom created by Jack, Phyllis, and Cane, making every interaction, every reassurance, and every strategic conversation an essential component of survival. As the legal battle drew nearer, the intensity of the confrontation escalated, with Jack meticulously preparing his case, Phyllis manipulating key figures and leveraging social influence, and Cane executing behind-the-scenes strategies that subtly undermined Victor's control, while Victor marshaled his resources, calculated every move, and sought to anticipate the maneuvers of his adversaries, aware that the slightest error could tip the scales irreversibly. And as the courtroom dates approached, the anticipation in Genoa City reached a fever pitch, with friends, rivals, and ordinary citizens alike eagerly following every development, fully aware that the outcome would not just affect Victor NEWMAN but the broader balance of power, wealth, and influence in the city. And as Victor stared across the boardroom table at the faces of those aligned against him, each expression, gesture, and inflection became a puzzle, a threat, and a challenge, demanding analysis, response, and, if necessary, preemptive action. And in the midst of it all, Victor realized that this was more than a legal battle. It was a test of his life's work, his relationships, and his very identity, a moment where every decision, Every tactic and every emotional choice could reverberate for years to come, leaving no room for error, hesitation, or complacency. And so, in the quiet of his office, surrounded by the trappings of power, Victor NEWMAN prepared to face perhaps the most significant challenge.